Okay, fantastic. So today we are talking about Measure ULA, which has been a hot topic of conversation for years now. So next slide, and definitely a priority for Abundant Housing LA. For in case anyone, this is your first contact with Abundant Housing LA, I just kind of wanted to introduce us and our values. We are focused on solving Los Angeles's housing crisis. We are what we call an all of the above pro-housing advocacy organization. So we fight for all sorts of homes, for all sorts of people of all kinds of families and income levels, permanent supportive housing, market rate housing, mixed income housing, deed restricted affordable housing, all of the above. And we are really based, we really are a grassroots organization. My boss likes to say there are some organizations with a lot of money, and there are some organizations with a lot of people behind them. We are more so the latter. We have you. We have grassroots activists that are excited about building change in their own communities, and the way we operationalize that is through our local chapter system. We have approximately 20 chapters across the county, from Long Beach, everybody's Long Beach on the south, to East Side, San Fernando Valley for all, from inland and Abundant Housing out in the Pomona Valley to West Side for everyone. So chances are, wherever you are, there's a chapter that will welcome you with open arms. So I recommend that you that you engage in that way, and we can help you do that. Next slide, please. Also, just a tiny bit about me. I'm the Director of Policy and Research for Abundant Housing LA. I manage our local policy work, our state policy work, and our growing research portfolio. I've been with Abundant for 3 years. I have a deep background in policy research and analysis. Also, been very active for over a decade in local politics, including running for city council. Next slide. And this is our policy framework. So we take a comprehensive approach to housing reform. We think that you need to do, there's no silver bullets. Thank you, Sam. And our 4 main policy pillars are legalizing more homes. So this has to do with zoning reform, making homes easier to build. So that's breaking down all the process and cost barriers that make it hard to deliver homes, funding affordable, deed restricted affordable housing, and protecting our renters, because we know this housing crisis is not ending overnight. Measure ULA is solidly within our second pillar, making homes easier to build. Despite its positive intent and the fact that it is accomplishing good things, it is also, as implemented, a barrier to housing production, to badly needed new housing. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Next slide, please. So what is Measure ULA? Measure ULA was a ballot measure that was passed in 2022 by the voters, and it was a sizable majority of over 57% of voters supported it citywide. And it was also supported by a broad array of civic organizations, including Abundant Housing LA and California YIMBY, Streets for All, and many ally organizations. It imposes new transfer tax levels at certain thresholds. We have had a transfer tax in Los Angeles prior to Measure ULA, but it's quite low. The Measure ULA added a 4% transfer tax on properties sold that were valued between 5 and 10 million, and 5.5% on properties over 10 million. And those value thresholds actually change over time with inflation. So it's not technically 5 and 10 anymore. It's a bit more than that. And there are some very limited exemptions for nonprofit housing developers, community land trusts, and housing cooperatives. But otherwise, all sorts of properties, whether they be commercial, residential, industrial, are subject to the transfer tax when they are sold. And the funds go to important things that we support, including housing production and preservation and homeless prevention in the form of renter assistance and legal support. Next slide, please. So what's the problem? Why are we worried about this? The list of things that ULA is funding are great, right? We would agree with that. Well, Measure ULA was sold as a mansion tax, but its application is not limited to high-end single-family homes. I think most of us would agree that folks buying a single-family home over $5 million probably can afford to give a little bit to help address our housing crisis. But the tax also impacts land zoned for industrial, commercial, and importantly, multifamily residential uses. And $5 million might seem like a lot, but it doesn't actually go all that far in Los Angeles. Remember, our land costs are very high, and because of many different zoning regulations and the desires of financiers, quite often, multifamily housing is built on quite large lots that can fit a huge parking garage under them, etc. So that's how we produce a lot of our housing, by either selecting large lots or assembling smaller lots into larger lots. And those lots can easily be over $5 million. So the measure places a very substantial tax on privately financed multifamily housing, which already faces a ton of challenges in the form of bureaucratic red tape, risky discretionary approval processes, high costs in terms of labor and construction. We have a labor shortage in the construction industry right now. There's all these macroeconomic constraints as well. So this was very unwelcome for the multifamily housing sector. Next slide, please. So let's get into some of the evidence. One of the most important pieces of research that has come out comes from some very respected researchers, a pair from the RAND Corporation and the UCLA Lewis Center. And they studied a couple years out what was the impact of ULA on multifamily housing production, which is obviously a key area of interest for Abundant Housing LA. Well, what did they find? It showed that there's Phillips and Ward's study shows that there was an 18% decline in multifamily housing starts as compared to neighboring jurisdictions. So this presented we don't live in LA City is not its own housing market, right? We live in an ecosystem. We live right next to many other cities, and we share a housing market. So the researchers were able to compare what was happening in the city of LA. Remember, this tax only applies to the city of LA, with what was happening in places like unincorporated LA County and Culver City and Santa Monica and many other places. And the decline was, the difference between those two submarkets was stark. Another interesting finding from Ward and Phillips is that they actually estimate that there was a net loss of deed-restricted affordable units as well, despite the fact that the money that is raised from the tax goes to the production of deed-restricted affordable housing production. Why is that the case? Well, it's because the majority of deed-restricted units that are delivered in the city of LA actually come from mixed income projects that are required to set aside a certain proportion of units as restricted in exchange for incentives through things like TOIA, TOC, CHIP, state density bonus law. And because fewer privately financed market projects were moving forward in this new world of this large tax, they estimated actually a net loss of deed restricted affordable units. Next slide, please. So what's the current political context? So we have a looming scary ballot measure that's statewide. This is the Taxpayer Protection Act, they're calling it, which is the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association is behind this, and it's a quite blunt instrument. It has a couple main provisions, but the one of interest to this discussion around ULA is that it would limit transfer taxes to a very, very small amount, 1/20th of 1% of the property value. So just to put that into context, I think that's about 1/100th of the Los Angeles City transfer tax for any property, the tax that existed before ULA. So this is quite low, and many cities rely on transfer taxes for either housing or even for general revenue. And the ballot measure does not distinguish between transfer taxes that are designed well, that are not inhibiting housing production, to the extent to which that we would be very concerned from transfer taxes that are designed better. And so this is a threat. This is a threat to an important revenue source for many cities across the state. Councilmember Rahman understood the concern. Like us, she was somebody that supported this tax, but has evaluated the evidence and has come to understand that although it is an important source of revenue, it needs to be fixed. It needs to be amended to ensure that it doesn't inhibit privately financed housing production. And so she worked to try to pass a motion that would have brought ULA reform to the June ballot. That did not happen. There was some concern across the council that it was moving too fast. But then the council president created an ad hoc committee on ULA with a short timeline. They have met once, and they will be meeting 2 more times and finishing their work by the end of April. And we are working hard along with a coalition of like-minded organizations to advocate through this process for a solid package of reforms that could be brought to the voters in November. Next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So what are our priorities for reform? The coalition is considering a number of different reforms, but these are the top 2 for us. First, an exemption for newly constructed multifamily and non-residential properties, i.e. commercial and industrial, from the tax for a determined period of time post-construction. 15 years is one time frame that folks have talked about, but we haven't sort of set that in stone yet as an advocacy point. And coupled with a permanent cap uh, on the maximum tax rate on multifamily and non-residential properties. So it's really important that we do both of these things. I think I saw in the chat some folks were talking about that there's a transfer of sale twice in many, many projects. That's absolutely the case. The way housing production often works is a developer will purchase a property, build it, get entitlements, build the project, and often they will sell it afterwards. So the exemption takes care of that second sale, protects the project from the tax on that second sale, but not the first sale, not the pre-sale. So it's also important to make sure that that pre-sale is not taxed too heavily that it will never happen at all. So these actually work really importantly together. There's other reasons why we want these reforms as well. We want to make sure our primary interest is housing, but commercial projects are also important for jobs, for tax revenue. There's great concern that if we're inhibiting the sale of properties, that's going to inhibit the growth in our tax base over time, because if you don't sell, you don't get reassessed. And then there's political reasons too. We need reform because we just talked about Howard Jarvis, right? And so we need to be able to be making the argument that we are solving this problem at home here in LA County to be able to combat a really draconian version of reform. So those are kind of like our main priorities. There are other things that the coalition will be advocating for as well, but these are central for us. Next slide. So next step. So these are a few things that you can do. So you can take a look at this coalition we're a part of. It's called Mend It, Don't End It Coalition. I think Josh is maybe going to be helping by putting those in the chat for you. We released an action alert prior to the first meeting of the ad hoc ULA committee, and we would love for you to send an email if you live in the city of LA to the city council expressing your desire for reform. And then we're really going to need your engagement. We had a good showing at the first ad hoc meeting. We want to have great showings at the next two meetings as well. We're getting some word that the next meeting will be Friday morning, April 17th. That would be at 9 a.m. We're recommending people come at 8 to get in line. The meetings are only an hour, 9 to 10. Full council has to start their meeting at 10 on Fridays. So there's kind of like a hard out for this committee meeting. So it's not the marathon that a lot of these public comment opportunities can be. That's not set in stone. It may not end up being April 17th, but maybe pencil that into your calendars. It would be amazing if you can join us and speak out for reform. And I think that's kind of what I have for prepared remarks. Here's just some ways to connect with Abundant Housing LA just in general, if this is your first time interacting with us. So email list is like the number one thing. Get on that email list. Join your chapter. I talked about that earlier. This is really the social glue that holds Abundant Housing together. And if you're so inclined, we will not turn down a financial contribution. So let's take down the slide deck. And I promised I would be fast to leave plenty of time for questions. And I know this is a savvy group, so we can move to discussion. Sam.
Hey, I dropped this question in the chat, but I'm sort of curious because I've seen folks in favor of reforming ULA sort of uh, suggest that the exemption for new multifamily housing should be the first 15 years.
Hmm.
Just the idea that, and I saw in the slides you said that the exemption would be for a defined period of time. And I'm kind of curious why, like, we're going to go through this whole process of trying to push for reform. Why time limit it? Why wouldn't we just say new housing shouldn't be taxed?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sam. I mean, look, I think there's a push and pull here, right? I mean, these are important revenues for things that we care about, and that the council cares about. And so I don't think that we're going to pass a package that everybody is happy with, right? This will be an exercise in political compromise. And so I certainly appreciate your point of view. I mean, I think, um, many of us would be comfortable with something that is a pure mansion tax, right? Um, but I think it's unlikely that that's a political reality with the council. Um, and so, I don't think that that is um, going to be a key talking point for us, that would be a permanent exemption. And the most important thing is, over time, we want to build housing, so that those first 15 years are definitely of greatest salience. Appreciate the question, Sam. Well, let me open my.
Yeah, Davis has his hand up, and then Bobby after that.
Cool.
Hi, Scott. So I dropped this question in the chat as well, and I saw Richard gave me one answer, so I appreciate that, Richard. I was just wondering what the thinking was at the time behind the decision to support ULA back when it was
Yeah.
first being considered.
Yeah.
Um, to me, it seems like, an obvious outcome that this would stifle production of new housing. So I was wondering why sort of the decision to support ULA back when it was first being considered.
Yeah. Well, so full disclosure, it precedes my tenure with Abundant Housing LA. And this was something that a number of pro-housing advocacy organizations went in on. I think it was a combination of things. I think one was, the desire to produce deed restricted housing. That's part of our policy platform that I introduced to you, at the beginning. So, we need a lot. We're, as I said, in all of the above outfit, but certainly below market rate units were even more underwater on than market rate units. So I think that was part of it. I think part of it was that Shane Phillips, who we all know and love, produced a piece of writing that was pretty persuasive for folks, that this was going to be something that would not have the dire anti-production effect that it has had. So I think a lot of folks relied on that as a cue to support something. So I think I kind of, based on the conversations I've had, I think those are probably the two biggest factors. You don't always get it right. And part of being in the policy world is admitting you were wrong and trying to fix it.
Thank you.
Bobby.
Thanks, Scott. So I think one of the most important points you made here today is that ULA actually caused a net loss on deed restricted affordable housing as well as its impact on the market rate. And so
Yeah.
I want to ask a similar question. You had alluded to it. Something I had heard about ULA, and I want to ask you because I don't recall if this was speculation or if this was actually found in the research, was that because it disincentivized sales of property,
Mhm.
it then delays the property value reassessment because of Prop 13. And then because of that, it actually reduces the city's total tax revenue because that impact is greater than the amount of money received from ULA. Was that found, or is that just one possible piece of speculation people were putting out?
Yeah, I know that's a concern. Mott, did you have that specific finding in your paper?
Yeah. By the way, hello, Scott. Thank you so much for hosting this. This is such an important conversation. So the paper that Mike Manville and I wrote introduced this concept that Bobby just mentioned, where basically Measure ULA is robbing Peter to pay Paul, because it is reducing one bucket of tax revenues, property taxes, in order to fill another bucket, which is ULA taxes. We sort of posited that this was happening and suggested an order of magnitude. And then some researchers from UCI, Harvard, and UCSD did a much more thorough estimate where they concluded that somewhere between, I believe it was 60 cents and $1.30 of property tax is offset by every dollar of ULA money raised. And it's not just to the city per se, it's to the full spectrum of beneficiaries of property tax. So the county safety net, the schools, the UC system, and the city, to be fair.
Good to have experts in the room. Thank you, Mott.
Thank you.
Experts who know other people's work, not my own.
Other questions? Feel free to raise your hands. I think Davis, we already heard from, right? Yeah.
I'll ask this follow-up question. So I'm just curious if there's any research out there about or like financial modeling of the impact of the 15-year exemption versus like a 30-year exemption versus a permanent exemption, and what the sort of relative impact on, development outcomes would be, or just sort of cost.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Mott maybe has the answer to this one too. I mean, I know the coalition is looking to invest in some more research, but I'm not aware of whether that's been studied.
Yeah. So if we look at this as several extremes. So one extreme would be that we make Measure ULA a mansion tax, and we don't tax anything that's not a single family home. In that case, ULA would raise about half the revenues that it's raising today. And importantly, in the context of how much money ULA has actually been able to spend and budget, ULA's raised $1 billion so far. It's only managed to spend in the several years that's existed. I think it's like three some years now. It's only managed to spend $100 million, and of that, only $10 million has actually gone to housing. Now, the city has allocated $600 million of that $1 billion that it's raised. Again, those are budget numbers. They've not actually been able to spend that money. And so the truth is, if Measure ULA were a mansion tax, I think 57% actually is the percentage of revenues that are coming from single family homes, if I remember correctly. It would basically not require that we reduce any ULA spending from today's level, and it would not require that we reduce even the budgeted spend for Measure ULA. So it could be a mansion tax without any reduction of current program, which is very important. Now, as far as what the effects of the various 15-year exemptions would be, a 15-year exemption for new multifamily construction would reduce Measure ULA revenues by about 8%. So if that's all we did, we'd go from 100% of the revenues today down to 92%. If you also exempted non-residential that was built in the last 15 years, that would take away another 5%. So together, you'd be able to retain 87% of the revenues of Measure ULA if all you did was exempt 15-year and newer buildings. If you incorporate the 1 to 2% cap on non-single family, that would add that would reduce. I need to check the numbers, but I think it's like another 15 or 20% or something like that. Basically, all of the scenarios could be implemented without, as I said, cutting any ULA spend or even cutting any ULA budget.
Sorry, so the question I was asking is actually the opposite about
Oh,
from
okay.
the developer perspective.
Okay.
If a developer, let's say the 5.5% tax costs them a million, let's say it costs them $5.5 million. Does a 15-year exemption, effectively reduce that by 80% because their buyer at the end of a build period is going to look at the model and say, oh, well, I'm going to get taxed when I sell this, a decade from now.
Yeah, that's a great
So
question. You were so patient while I didn't answer it. Thank you.
no, I mean the other question is good. The other answer is useful too, but yeah.
Yeah, if you discount a 5.5% tax, back 15 years to today's present value, you end up with something like a 2.5% or so tax, which is considered to be more or less the limits of tolerability for a pro forma. That's how a lot of the merchant builders who have been very active in advocating for this have analyzed it. They've only looked at the 5.5% discounted back by 15 years. You're raising a very important point, Sam, which is now if we fast forward 15 years and I'm trying to sell my building to a core buyer who operates real estate, they're going to be thinking about that ULA tax when they sell the building. The bank that's lending them the money is going to be thinking, wow, if I have to foreclose, I'm going to have to pay a 5.5% tax. If I auction the building off at foreclosure, I'm going to have to pay another 5.5% tax. Therefore, instead of lending them 65% of the value, I'm only going to lend them 55% of the value, meaning that they have to go raise more equity for a lower profit project. And so I do believe that to a certain extent, the 15-year exemption is kicking the can down the road in a potentially dangerous way. I think it could unlock some of the projects that are in the pipeline that are currently stalled. It's enough to probably get those off the ground. I think unless we include the long-term cap on transfer tax for non-single family homes, it won't get us what we need. And I think a long-term cap that is somewhere under 2% is widely considered tolerable by the real estate industry.
That's very helpful. So effectively 15 years gets you from 5.5 to 2.5. But if you have, let's say, a 2%, after 15 years, now you're really talking about like it's functionally like a 0.75% tax.
Something like that. And
Yeah.
then and let's anchor it 1% or 1.5%. We
Yeah.
may have to compromise and settle for 2. And the thing that's driving that 1 to 2% cap, honestly, is the assumption that this may become a model for a statewide solution. And several jurisdictions, most importantly, San Jose, have transfer taxes at about like San Jose specifically is a 1.5% transfer tax right now for everything above $1 million. And their fire department in particular is very, very concerned about losing that, even though it only accounts for about $30 million of revenue per year in the city of San Jose, which is interesting. But it's considered a hot political item. And so a lot of the statewide reforms are being shaped to accommodate San Jose and not kind of scare them off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Mott. I think Mott spoke very well about the need for both of these reforms. Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, Scott or someone, can you please explain why the Howard Jarvis proposal would be so detrimental? In my opinion, I don't see the city of LA coming to an agreement that fixes this. And I almost see like that may be the only option, which it feels like a nuclear option. It's very sad. But I also want to know what your thoughts are on like what that proposal would be damaging to the rest of the state.
Well, there's a lot of cities that rely on transfer taxes for even general revenue, and and there are a lot of transfer taxes that are structured in a much less aggressive way, that have much lower rates, that don't seem to be having this anti-production production impact, and so this is something that would seriously impact housing and city services across a number of jurisdictions across the state. I understand your perspective around the strong desire for reform, frustration that it hasn't happened yet. We share that frustration. And I think to some degree, the initiative, although I don't agree with the design details, has proven useful as an instigator for other reforms. But this is really underlining the need to do something. And I think we need to get something out of this local process, and we're likely going to need a state bill as well. And we're prepared to be heavily involved in all of that. Yeah, so Mitchell makes a good point. There's another provision in the TPA unrelated to transfer taxes that is also concerning, which has to do with ballot thresholds. Excellent point. Any other questions? Or were there any questions that were dropped in the chat, Joshua, that we haven't answered?
That is a good question. I was focused on the slides. So, if you did drop a question in the chat that hasn't been addressed, please speak up.
Yes, and thank you, Maud, for noting that Assemblymember Wicks is very interested in spearheading a state fix. I think there's been some hesitation in Sacramento because we don't know the exact results of the signatures for the Taxpayer Protection Act, and things always move slower than we reformers would like them to move. But I think they're probably gonna meet their signatures, and I think that will light some fire under Sacramento. But I think one of the things that I'm excited about is we can lead, right? Like if we do something here, that also lights a fire in Sacramento. If we take responsibility for our own issue here.
Andrew's got a question in the chat.
Scott, what is the guidance that we should be speaking about or writing letters or talking about in front of the committee?
Yeah, so we will provide that when the time comes. I will say the coalition has been, hasn't arrived at exact numbers on these reforms yet. This is a negotiation. So we will, so far our policy letters have not defined the exact years and rates for these key reforms. I think that the more definition will come on those things in the weeks ahead. But it is a conversation with a broad coalition. So those exact deal points are not totally solidified yet, but we will certainly be keeping you in the loop on that. Is there a policy brief document and or frequently asked questions for supporters or to help share situation with others? That's a great question, Uduak. So we have talking points for our we had talking points and we have an action alert. We do not have a policy brief or frequently asked questions. So we can look into providing some more resources. I think there will also be resources by the full coalition that will be developed. So as those resources are developed, we will distribute them.
I think we can probably wrap up if there are no other questions.
Appreciate this amazing, passionate crew of activists. These are hard conversations, right? Where we're not agreeing on everything with some friends in the housing world. And so this is, I think, what makes Abundant Housing LA special is, we're willing to learn from our mistakes, to fight the good fight, even if it's not always popular in all circles. So appreciate you being here with us in this fight, and we will be keeping you informed, and thank you so much. All right. Have a good night, guys. Bye.